Welcome to today's Explainer. We are unpacking a political crossover right now that honestly sounds like a glitch in the Matrix. We're looking at a recent analysis from the YouTube channel Promethean Updates, and they're claiming that a massive, totally hidden economic shift is currently underway in the United States. And this shift? Well, it's creating some of the most unlikely political bedfellows you could possibly imagine. We are talking about a sudden, completely unexpected alignment between figures who usually sit on polar opposite ends of the political spectrum, and they are coming together over a shared vision for the nation's economic future. Okay, let's dive into this. Right off the bat, we run into a massive paradox that the source analysis uses to really hook us. Why on earth are Donald Trump and Senator Bernie Sanders suddenly agreeing on economics? The channel argues that if you're looking at this through your traditional political lenses, it makes absolutely zero sense. But they claim this crossover isn't just some bizarre coincidence. Nope, it's actually the very first clue that the old rules of the economic game are being completely thrown out the window. So to really understand this, the video points directly to a claim Donald Trump made recently. He said that when Bernie Sanders lost his primary battles, a ton of his supporters actually pivoted and voted for Trump instead. Why? Because they supposedly shared an economic plan. Now, the source highlights that this wasn't just a throwaway comment. It was said while discussing public-private partnerships, specifically the idea of the government taking a stake in massive tech and manufacturing sectors, like the AI industry and Intel. And guess what? This is exactly the kind of 50% managed public-private partnership that Bernie Sanders has been advocating for. But here's the thing. It isn't just Trump pushing this narrative. It's his inner circle, too. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is actively and publicly critiquing what he literally calls a slavish devotion to free markets over the last 25 years. Bessent's argument is that the old system, where we basically just trusted the free market to automatically fix everything, it simply didn't work. According to the video, Bessent is making the case that the old system was fundamentally rigged against the average worker. It left them feeling like they had to basically play the economic lottery just to survive. And this brings us to the core metaphor of today's explainer, the economic box. The channel posits that for decades now, we've been trapped in this conceptual box, right? We're forced to choose between only two economic regimes, pure free markets on one side and socialism on the other. If you're stuck inside that box, Trump and Sanders agreeing seems entirely impossible. But the source argues that this box is just an illusion. They claim we've been missing a completely hidden third economic regime entirely, one that isn't strictly free market and isn't socialist either. And they argue that the current administration is actively trying to break us out of that box, once and for all. Section 2, the new rules data. So the analysis moves from political rhetoric directly into the hard numbers here, claiming that concrete economic data proves this new regime is already in motion. The source points squarely at a recent May jobs report as prime evidence of this. Wall Street experts confidently forecasted that the economy would add 105,000 jobs. The actual number that came out? A massive 172,000 non-farm payrolls. The channel argues that this huge 64% miss by the experts is concrete proof that Wall Street simply doesn't understand the new rules. The video makes the case that when you stop being slavishly devoted to free markets and you actually start utilizing proactive industrial policy, those traditional economic models completely fail to predict the explosive growth that comes next. But out of that entire massive jobs report, the channel zeroes in on one highly revealing number, 7,000. That's the number of new factory jobs added. Now, I know what you're thinking. On the surface, 7,000 seems like a tiny drop in the bucket for an economy the size of the US. However, the source argues that the operative word here is yet. They claim this relatively small figure represents the very beginning, the absolute leading edge of a much, much larger industrial policy boom that's just barely starting to take shape. To explain why 7,000 is such a crucial leading indicator, the video relies on an explanation from Peter Navarro about how a manufacturing boom actually unfolds in reality. Look, after decades of deindustrialization, you don't just magically flip a switch and hire 1 million factory workers overnight. It happens in 3 distinct steps. First, you get the actual orders. Second, you see production ramp up and massive capital investments. We're talking machinery, construction, serious overtime. It is only in the third and final step that this boom finally translates into robust, widespread hiring. The channel argues that we are currently moving through those absolutely critical first 2 steps right now. Section 3, shifting to skilled trades. According to the source, because we are in the really early stages of this manufacturing and industrial resurgence, this economic shift isn't being felt by Wall Street or the Davos crowd first. Instead, it is being felt most acutely by young people who are just entering the workforce. Check out this extraordinary and honestly largely unreported data point recently highlighted by the administration. A staggering 60% of Gen Z Americans are planning to pursue skilled trade work this year. 60%. That is a massive generational pivot away from the traditional four-year university track, heading directly toward the very industries this new economic plan is allegedly trying to rebuild. Now, what's really interesting about this is the underlying reality driving this massive shift. It's not just high schoolers seeing the writing on the wall. The data claims half of Gen Z college graduates are also pivoting straight into the trades. Why? Well, because the median pay in skilled trades right now frequently matches or even exceeds many four-year degrees. Plus, these young people get to completely avoid taking on hundreds of thousands of dollars in crushing student debt. Add to that the fact that 94% of U.S. contractors are reporting severe labor shortages, which naturally drives those wages even higher. And you can see exactly why the workforce is rapidly realigning itself to meet this new industrial focus. Section 4. The American System Explained. So let's recap. We have political rivals agreeing, Wall Street experts missing the data by a mile, and Gen Z flooding into the trades. The source video claims there is actually a deeply historical but long-forgotten economic framework secretly driving all of these modern data points. The exact name for this framework, as referenced by Peter Navarro, is the American System. It was a national economic plan originally proposed by Alexander Hamilton and later aggressively championed by Henry Clay. The core philosophy here is remarkably straightforward but deeply profound. A nation that cannot produce what it needs is fundamentally a vulnerable nation. It operates on the premise that true sovereignty requires domestic industrial strength, rather than just crossing your fingers and relying on the invisible hand of the global marketplace. The source breaks this historical powerhouse down into three main pillars. First up, tariffs. But not just for revenue. Tariffs used actively to build and protect domestic industry. Second, finance. Using finance to deliberately fuel national growth instead of just, shuffling money around on Wall Street. And third, infrastructure. Building massive infrastructure projects to bind a sprawling continent together into a single, highly cohesive economic unit. The video argues that these exact policies are what turned an infant United States into the world's most powerful economy, long before Washington drifted away and decided to outsource all that strength. Section 5. Breaking the economic box. Okay, this is where the channel makes its most provocative claim by far. If this American system was really so incredibly successful at building the nation's wealth, why isn't it taught in economics classes? Why have we been stuck in that box for so long? Well, the channel asserts that a competing ideology, which they refer to as the British system of the British Empire, was absolutely terrified of this self-sufficient American economic model. According to the video, this competing empire actively fought to erase the American system from the history books completely. The goal, they claim, was to suppress this knowledge and essentially force the American public back into that false paradigm, the box, where you only get to choose between free market globalism or socialism, both of which they argue keep a nation dependent rather than truly sovereign. To underline just how serious this alleged suppression really was, the video maps out a highly controversial historical timeline. They claim that Presidents Abraham Lincoln in 1865 and William McKinley in 1901 were assassinated specifically because they championed this American system over the British system. And, according to the channel, Donald Trump currently stands in that exact same historical line today, making him a modern target. The channel's boldest claim here is that the only way to stop the U.S. from reclaiming its sovereignty is to keep this system permanently hidden in the shadows. Which brings us to the ultimate question posed by today's explainer, based on all the source material we've just explored, from the wild political realignments of Trump and Sanders, to Treasury secretaries openly trashing the free market, to Gen Z flocking to the trades, right down to the historical echoes of Alexander Hamilton. Are we truly breaking out of the economic box? I'm going to leave you to ponder whether these modern data points really do represent the dramatic return of this hidden historical American system. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the data.